Rhode Island may be the smallest state in America, but that is exactly where its weirdness begins. Behind its beautiful coastal towns and colonial New England history, there are places that feel out of sync with the modern world. Nearly empty forest villages, foggy islands in the Atlantic, and old industrial towns that seem frozen in time. And what makes it even stranger is that almost all of these places are only a short distance from modern suburbs and major New England metro areas. These are the 15 weirdest towns in Rhode Island, places that prove this tiny state holds some of the strangest and most unexpected atmospheres in all of New England. Exeter feels like Rhode Island lost from the modern map. In the smallest state in America, this town is filled with dense forest, quiet roads, swamps, and empty spaces. Many parts of Exeter do not even have a truly active downtown. Instead, there are long, dark roads with houses spread far apart, as if the town is intentionally avoiding modern development. Exeter's strange atmosphere becomes even stronger because of its famous folklore. The town has been connected to 19th century New England vampire legends, especially the case of Mercy Brown, one of the most famous vampire stories in American history. That story came from local panic over tuberculosis, but Exeter's forests and old cemeteries have kept the legend alive to this day. With its small population, limited commercial centers, and unusual isolation for Rhode Island, Exeter feels like a town caught between the modern world and a darker old New England. Burrillville feels like a piece of wild New England that somehow ended up in Rhode Island. The town is filled with dense forests, dark lakes, narrow winding roads, and small villages scattered far from one another. Its weirdness is not only about the landscape. Burrillville has a reputation full of urban legends, haunted locations, and a backwoods aura that makes many outsiders feel slightly uneasy. Some areas near the forests and reservoirs are even described by locals as creepy for no clear reason. At the same time, Burrillville is also filled with old mill villages that slowly lost their purpose after the textile industry faded. The mix of small industrial ruins, wide forests, and isolation gives the town a strange vibe, like a place that keeps falling several decades behind the outside world. Westerly's weirdness comes from two worlds colliding. On one side, the town is known as a beautiful coastal area with expensive homes, marinas, and a classic New England summer vacation atmosphere. But just a few minutes from its shoreline, the mood quickly shifts into an older, quieter town that feels like Rhode Island from another era. Downtown Westerly is filled with old stone buildings, a classic theater, and traces of the granite industry that once helped the town grow. Some parts feel elegant, while others feel like an old working-class town quietly left behind by modern tourism. That contrast makes Westerly feel slightly out of sync. And because it sits on the Connecticut border, Westerly's identity also feels mixed. Half Rhode Island, half anonymous New England coastal town. Hopkinton feels like a part of Rhode Island that has not fully entered the modern century. This small town in the western part of the state is filled with forests, rivers, narrow unlit roads, and tiny villages that feel separated from the outside world. Many people are surprised because Rhode Island is usually associated with dense suburbs and coastal towns, while Hopkinton feels more like the quiet interior of New England. Hopkinton's weirdness comes from its sense of isolation. The fog that often appears around the swamps and forests makes the atmosphere feel like something from an old New England folktale. The town is also close to old rail lines and historic small villages, giving it a strong feeling of time standing still. Glocester has the vibe of an old New England town left behind in the middle of the forest. Its roads wind past small lakes, swamps, and thick wooded areas, making many parts of town feel remote, even though Rhode Island itself is tiny. Gloucester's strangeness also comes from its colonial history, which still feels very present. The town began developing in the early 1700s as a farming community and remote settlement on the western edge of the Rhode Island colony. The historic village of Shepwreck is still filled with 18th and 19th century buildings, including an old general store, colonial inns, and wooden homes in the old New England style. One of the strangest details is the presence of many small colonial cemeteries hidden in the woods and along the roads, some dating back to the mid-1700s. Foster feels like the wild side of Rhode Island that few people imagine. Foster's weirdness comes from its very old colonial and rural history. The area was first settled in the early 1700s as a remote farming community in the western part of the Rhode Island colony. Because the land was rocky and difficult for large-scale farming, Foster developed slowly and remained isolated far longer than Rhode Island's coastal towns. Foster is also known for historic buildings, small colonial-era cemeteries, and local folklore typical of inland New England. Small villages like Clayville and Hopkins Mills feel almost frozen in time, filled with old wooden houses and 19th century buildings. Block Island feels like a small world separated from modern New England. The island sits far out in the Atlantic, about 12 miles from mainland Rhode Island, and the normal way to reach it is by ferry or small plane. Once you arrive, the atmosphere immediately feels different. High bluffs, old lighthouses, narrow windy roads, and sea fog that often appears suddenly make the island feel almost like the setting of a Gothic novel. The island also has a long and fairly dark maritime history. For centuries, the waters around Block Island were known as dangerous because of thick fog and hidden rocks, causing many shipwrecks. Lighthouses like Southeast Lighthouse were built to prevent those tragedies, but they also add to the island's mysterious aura. The mix of geographic isolation, wild Atlantic weather, and old New England character makes Block Island feel like a place living at a different rhythm from the outside world. Little Compton feels like Rhode Island stopped developing about a century ago. This small town in the southeastern corner of the state is filled with stone fields, narrow roads without sidewalks, old farmhouses, and colonial stone walls that still divide the land today. There is no large downtown, almost no obvious modern development, and many corners of town look nearly the same as they did generations ago. Little Compton's weirdness comes from its sense of distance. Even though it is in dense New England, the town feels remote and almost pastoral. Sea fog from the Atlantic often covers its farms and coastline, creating a quiet atmosphere that sometimes feels more like an old English village than modern America. Tiverton has a strange vibe because it feels like a town that ended up in the wrong state. Geographically, it feels more connected culturally and economically to southeastern Massachusetts than to much of Rhode Island. Many people even pass through Tiverton without realizing they have entered Rhode Island, because the atmosphere feels more like a rural New England coastal town than a typical suburb of this tiny state. Southern Tiverton is filled with country roads, small farms, salt marshes, and old seaside homes that create a calm but slightly isolated feeling. But in other parts of town, modern commercial strips and suburban areas appear, feeling disconnected from its historic landscape. That contrast makes Tiverton feel slightly split in identity. North Smithfield feels like a town built on the shadows of the American Industrial Revolution. In Rhode Island, which is usually dense and suburban, North Smithfield has many corners that feel quiet and slightly forgotten. The town's weirdness comes from the industrial ghost town atmosphere that still remains today. Along the Blackstone Valley, old textile mills and former worker villages still stand between forests and country roads. The historic village of Slatersville is the most unique part. It is considered one of the first planned mill villages in America, built for textile workers in the early 1800s. Even now, the area feels like an industrial time machine, with old worker houses and large mill buildings dominating the small landscape around them. Warwick feels weird because it is like Rhode Island in suburban simulation form. Technically, it is one of the largest cities in the state, but many people struggle to explain what Warwick actually is. It is not a lively downtown city, not a classic beach town, and not a regular suburb. It feels like a collection of strip malls, wide roads, airport hotels, small marinas, and neighborhoods blending together without one clear center of identity. Warwick also has a long history with storms and coastal flooding. Hurricane Carol in 1954 hit the city hard and changed much of its shoreline. Even today, some areas near the water still have a fragile vibe, especially when sea fog rolls in and Atlantic winds grow stronger. Add Rhode Island T.F. Green International Airport, and Warwick feels like a place people are always passing through, but rarely truly know. Johnston has a weird vibe because it feels like the things other towns usually hide. In Rhode Island, known for historic coastal towns and tidy New England suburbs, Johnston is instead known for heavy industrial areas, messy major roads, and one of the largest landfills in the state, which has long shaped its local identity. The town also has a strange history of development that feels almost random. Many roads in Johnston grew without a clear pattern, making some areas feel like a suburb that expanded too quickly without a central identity. There is no major downtown that truly defines the town. Instead, there is a collision of strip malls, industrial zones, and older neighborhoods. Because it sits close to Providence but feels so different, Johnston often seems like the side of Rhode Island that rarely appears on tourist postcards. Rough, practical, and slightly absurd. Portsmouth feels weird because it lives between the calm of coastal New England and the shadow of major military history. Located on Aquidneck Island alongside Newport, Portsmouth is filled with small marinas, quiet coastal roads, and old homes that look peaceful. But behind that calm atmosphere, many parts of town feel like former strategic land slowly turning into a strange suburb in the middle of the sea. The most unique part is the area around former military facilities and Navy land that were once highly active during the 20th century. Some coastal areas still carry a Cold War coastal town atmosphere, with wide, empty roads, old government buildings, and open spaces that feel too quiet for a place so close to busy Newport. Central Falls feels weird because it is like an urban compression experiment in the middle of New England. In terms of size, it is one of the smallest cities in the United States, but its population density is extremely high. Triple-decker houses stand close together, narrow streets are filled with activity, and there is almost no empty space. It feels like an entire city has been squeezed into just a few blocks. Central Falls' weirdness comes from its intensity. Unlike many Rhode Island towns with quiet suburbs or open coastal areas, Central Falls feels like it is always moving, loud, crowded, and almost without pause. The city also has an extreme economic history. In 2011, Central Falls became one of the first modern American cities to file for major municipal bankruptcy. That fact makes its reputation even more unusual. A tiny city with economic pressure and density that feels much larger than its actual size. Bristol feels weird because this small town seems trapped in a permanent patriotic celebration. This coastal town is famous as the home of America's oldest 4th of July parade, a tradition that has continued since the late 1700s. In many other places, American flag decorations appear a few days before Independence Day. In Bristol, the red, white, and blue line on the road can remain visible almost all year. Bristol's weirdness comes from how deeply the town's identity is tied to old New England patriotism. Colonial homes, narrow streets near the harbor, and 18th century buildings make the town feel like a living museum of the American Revolution. When summer arrives, the atmosphere becomes extreme. Parades, marching bands, flag-covered homes, and a mood that almost feels like an endless national festival.